Take that, you piece of crap. Yo, what is up guys, it's TyrantXY here and welcome to another game review. This time I am reviewing Gears of War 1, the first Gears of War game. Now, the story begins with you as Marcus Phoenix and you are in a prison. And then you are basically rescued by your best friend Dominic Santiago. Then, along with two other characters who are introduced later on in the game, you are on a mission to basically defeat the Locust, who are the main enemy of the game, by activating a giant light mass bomb of sorts. And basically that is the entire plot of the game. You're basically moving from point A to point B. You're basically fighting for a bunch of enemies so you can basically fulfill an end objective. But the thing is, the story of this game isn't too bad, as this is a relatively fun game to play. Despite having a simple war story of sorts set in the future on a different planet, since this is not Earth, it's actually a pretty interesting story, especially since the characters themselves are very interesting too. The main group of characters with Marcus, Dom, Cole and Baird is a very interesting group of characters, since basically these guys always make rip jokes on each other depending on what the situation offers, but it's always nicely comedically timed. This is pretty much one of the most interesting teams in pretty much in gaming, I'd say, along with others from other games. And these set of characters, these four characters, pretty much keep you going throughout the entire game. Yes, there's a few other characters throughout the game, like Anya, who basically gives you information about the entire game, Colonel Hoffman, who's the leader, and then a few other characters who pretty much end up dead pretty much by the end of the first act. But yeah, the campaign in this game and the story is particularly it's okay, since it is setting up a new universe on a new planet, and I think it really does it quite well. But really, it's mostly just the characters joking around each other and basically getting through the difficulty of basically the whole war that's going on and trying to achieve their objective, which they do in the end. But obviously, since we know how this franchise goes, so yeah, honestly, overall, I think the story and the characters are actually done pretty well. The chemistry between them all is actually done particularly well, and it's not very easily achieved when you're trying to make a squad of characters all likable, and all these characters are very likable. Now, this game is a third-person shooter, so obviously there are a few different type of mechanics to your usual first-person shooters. Now, the way you select your weapons is by the D-pad. Up is your grenades, down is your pistol, right and left are pretty much your primaries. As you can carry around 3 weapons and 1 grenade type in this game, so I think that's a pretty nice amount of weaponry. Well, that you can hold. Not only that, you can do certain actions that your character can do, like roll, evade. Basically, you can even hold down A to run, basically. But you can't jump in this game, which is basically what the rolling mechanic is for. But you can also hide behind cover and mount over it. You can even fire blindly from behind the cover too, instead of having to aim to poke your head up above it. And this can be very useful for when the enemy are closing in on you, since the enemy does charge at you most of the time. So yeah, you can blind fire, which is obviously, of course, for when the enemies get very close to you. And yeah, obviously, since there's a few different type of mechanics, there's also quite a decent amount of weaponry in this game too. Well, kinda. I mean, compared to the other Gears games, it's quite little, but honestly, for a starting game, it's actually quite a lot. More than what Halo CE offered for its first outing. Like, at least 2 assault rifles, a sniper rifle of sorts, 2 pistols, shotgun, an explosive bow and arrow type weapon, a grenade launcher of sorts, which is the boom shot, and there's even a special weapon that brings down a giant laser on the enemies, which is called the Hammer of Dawn. So yeah, there is quite a decent amount of weapons for this game, and it will keep you going throughout most of the way. And most of these weapons actually work fairly well, and some of them actually work less well depending on your difficulty of the game. Like most of the time you have the Lancer, which has a sort of chainsaw bayonet on it, but when you go on to, if you play the game in Insanity, it's actually pretty much the best option is to pick the Locust Hammer Burst, really, which is basically a much more powerful and long-range assault rifle, despite it not having the chainsaw attachment, but nonetheless it works. There is only one grenade type in this game too, which is the frag grenade, and when you can even aim the weapon so you can see where it lands and basically when it explodes. And you can also and this is very good for where you want to know where the enemies are and stuff. So there's not really much to do with this game. I mean, you also do have to interact with objects too throughout the game, which can be quite annoying since there's probably at least one of those throughout every act. So yeah, the game also goes through the events of acts. Like there is 5 acts throughout the game, and there is a certain amount of chapters. And overall, I think the game lasts about probably 9 to 10 to maybe even 11 hours, depending on your difficulty. And yeah, the game does actually take quite a bit amount of time to do, but nonetheless it's a decent amount of time for a third-person shooter that's going through a decent, for a number of acts. Now, this game does have quite an interesting level design, as each act is pretty much set in a different area, and pretty much the game does actually get better and better with the way the level designs are. Hell, there's even points in time where you even get to go in a vehicle, a minecart at times. Basically, the game can be quite innovative with the way the game goes. Hell, you even go underground at some point, well, since that's where the locusts come from. But the level design was really interesting, as they actually did quite a few things to make it interesting and to keep you going. Instead of just being a continuous linear line, it actually does try and do different things to basically make sure the plot goes forward. And it really was quite interesting, especially since there's also points in the game where you have to split up. Since this game does have 2-player co-op, there is moments in the game where you have to decide which path to take at certain points. Like someone will go right and someone will go left. Someone will provide cover and fire while the other one tries to hold out. So yeah, there is split points in the game, and these are pretty interesting because you have to really think about the person you're playing with, or if you're playing on your own, about the skills that you have with the game, as each path presents a different problem. And I think this was a nice and I think this is a really cool decision, giving you a decision to make through a different situation that could end up either kicking your ass, or you'll be able to kick its ass. And yeah, it's really interesting that they put in a decision bit where you had to basically think which path is the best. I think that was pretty interesting. And yeah, so the locations of the game too is also fairly interesting. Like you go to an oil refinery, well, kinda. You go onto a train at some point. Hell, you even go to Marcus's home at some point. And I really did like the way the game did look very nice. This game is over 10 years old now, and the graphics still look pretty nice for its age. Since the game is supposed to show how dark and gritty it is, it does that very well. And since this world is pretty much almost dead looking, it does that almost well too. And the way the characters look, the armor and everything, hell, even the weapons look very nice and different, and not really the sort of weapons you usually see around these days. So yeah, the way the world has been designed, the level design, even the way the characters and the graphics have been done has also been very done nicely. So for a game that is over 10 years old, that's a pretty damn good feat. Now, the variety of enemies in this game is quite expansive, since you have your infantry types, your heavy special weapons type, and then you also have your sort of boss type enemies that appear randomly throughout the game. Now, the enemy in this game is called the Locust, and they basically look like some sort of reptilian humanoids. And there is quite a lot of enemy variations. You have like the infantry, the grenadier, basically mainly use shotguns and grenades. You have boomers, who basically use the grenade launcher type weapon. You even have small little attack dog types like the wrenches, which basically will melee you to death. And of course there's also the berserker, which is pretty much the sort of semi-boss enemy type throughout the game, which you'll see about 3 or so times throughout the game, and the only way you can just kill them is with the Hammer of Dawn. So obviously these are set pieces, but these can be quite challenging depending on what the situation is, since each time you have to be more cautious with what you're doing. And the way the enemy has been designed and the way they operate has actually been done significantly well, since the enemy can be quite tough to fight on Insanity, since this can be quite a difficult game to play at times, because the enemy can be quite ferocious with their attacks, and they will literally try and charge at you at times, which is what some enemies are designed to do, like Grenadiers, since their main weapon of choice is a shotgun or a Baltic pistol. And of course there's even snipers throughout the game who are also can be quite annoying, but luckily they're weak. And so yeah, there isn't really, when you think about it, a lot of enemy types throughout the game, since the boomers are pretty much the only big enemy types aside from the berserker. And there is a boss fight at the very end, but depending on the difficulty, this can be done quite effectively. Well, not effectively, but it can be over with quite quickly. And so yeah, boss fight, though it's not the worst thing I've seen, since it actually does take more than 10 minutes to do at times, or 5 minutes depending. It was a difficult boss fight depending on the difficulty, but if you have the right weapons, it can be done very quickly. Honestly, overall, I think the enemies were done particularly well in this game. They're pretty fun to fight, and you have to be really strategic in how you fight them, because of their different methods of how they fight. So, yeah, I think... And the AI isn't done too bad either. They do work very nicely well compared to other video games I've seen in the past. So, yeah, I think the enemy has been done particularly well in this game. Finally, we have the multiplayer. Now, the multiplayer for its time is relatively small, as there's only 3 or so game modes on Gears of War's multiplayer. So basically the campaign is what is mainly supposed to hold up the game. But and usually I don't play the Gears of War multiplayer all that often, because I'm not really particularly the best at Gears of War's multiplayer. I will say that, because it can be quite difficult to basically best your opponent. Even on one-on-one, it can be difficult to best your opponent at times. But nonetheless, it's particularly fun to play, along with the type of game modes that there is. It's like sort of your usual team deathmatch, Annex, which is sort of similar to King of the Hill, and then you have Assassination, which is basically where the other team must execute the team's leader, and the leader are the only ones who are allowed to pick up new weapons. And so pretty much there's only 3 game modes in this game. From what I know, I haven't particularly explored the multiplayer all that much, but other than that, I think the multiplayer does operate pretty well, especially when the teams are balanced, when there's enough players in the game as well. But it is a particularly fun multiplayer to play. The maps are okay too, and designed specifically mainly for the cover-based aspect of the game. Now there's a few other things. The thing that the AI, not the enemy AI, but the friendly AI can be quite useless at times. Like, they can provide decent support, but when you go down, you can go down on co-op, so your co-op partner has to pick you up. But that isn't possible when you're on your own. You basically die, and the AI partner can't pick you up. Luckily, this is sorted in the next Gears of War games, but it can be quite annoying that the fact you'll die and your AI teammate can't pick you up. But since Insanity on all the Gears of Wars makes it impossible for you can't go down anywhere. I think overall the game is decent. For a starting game of a new franchise, this was done particularly well. There are a few things that are done wrong here and there, but mostly this is a very entertaining and well done game, especially the campaign and the characters that go along with it, because the characters really do drive you forward the game, and its interesting gun mechanics and level design. And then there's the multiplayer, which does give you a bit of respite, or a little bit more entertainment to keep you going. So overall, I think Gears of War 1 is actually a particularly decent third-person shooter, and I will give it an 8.5. So, that is my review of Gears of War 1. A decent start for this third-person shooter, and obviously over time it got much better, until probably a few years down the line, and then obviously now it's come back in a good way. But nonetheless, Gears of War 1 was a decent beginning for this franchise. So, hope you've enjoyed this review. Leave a like, subscribe, comment down below what you think is right or wrong with the game, and I shall see you guys in the next random video.